Good morning. Buenos dias. Welcome to our panel, Drawing the Line, how redistricting impacts Latino communities in Georgia. We're proud to be co-hosting this panel with the Brennan Center and the Brennan en Español. And at the same time, a little bit sad that this is the last of the 4 panels that we are organized in partnership with the Brennan en Español. Great partnership so far. Hispanic Federation has a strong commitment to language justice and we are making this panel accessible in English with simultaneous interpretation into Spanish. You will be able to listen in both languages and ask questions in the language you feel most powerful in. La Hispanic Federation tiene un gran compromiso con la justicia lingüística y por lo tanto el panel será accesible en inglés con interpretación simultánea en español. Usted podrá tanto escuchar como hacer preguntas en el idioma en que se sienta con más poder. Para acceder a la herramienta de interpretación, haga clic en el icono del globo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Seleccione el idioma de su preferencia y silenciar audio original y listo. Y si está conectando a través de un teléfono móvil o tableta, haga clic en los 3 puntos que dicen más, seleccione interpretación de idiomas y siga los pasos mencionados previamente. Our series focuses on analyzing the impact of redistricting viewed from the Latinx point of view and answer a couple of questions. How redistricting will impact the Latinx community for the next decade? Will the new maps lead to more representation for Latinx communities at the local, state, and federal level? And what do we need to do in the short term and in the long term to ensure that our community has the tools, the information, and the motivation needed to get involved in the 2030 redistricting process? Today, we'll be talking about the state of Georgia and how the newly drawn district will impact the more than 1.1 million Latinos that call Georgia home. With the Latino population in Georgia continuing to grow, we thought now it would be the perfect time to have this discussion. And I couldn't be more excited about the amazing panelists and friends we have brought to really shine a light on this issue. First, Gigi Pedraza, founder and CEO of Latino Community Fund of Georgia. Jerry Gonzalez, CEO, Galeo, Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. Jackie Colon, Southeast Regional Director, Naleo Educational Fund. Jenny Castillo, Regional Engagement Director, Roosevelt Institute, and Judy Ludensky, the Senior Counsel of Democracy at the Brennan Center. But let's start. The redistricting process can sometimes seem like something that is convoluted and sometimes difficult to understand. The Naleo Educational Fund has been working in Georgia and other states to involve the Latino community in the redistricting process. And I know, Jackie, that you have probably spent a lot of time going over how redistricting process works here in Georgia. My question to you, let's start with this. Can you give us a quick explanation on how the redistricting process happens here? Who draws the maps? Who decides who the new maps end up?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Jackie Colon, the Southeast Regional Director of Naleo Educational Fund. Naleo Educational Fund is the nation's leading nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that facilitates full Latino participation in the American political process, from citizenship to public service. It is my honor to be with you because this is an extremely important conversation that we're having. So there's so much regarding redistricting, so I'm going to try to kind of do a really quick 101 because we really want to be able to engage everyone. So one of the things that I want to at least begin by sharing is that there's different classifications throughout the country in regards to redistricting. So as it pertains particularly to Georgia, it is classified as what they call a legislative dominant one, which is in a legislative dominant state, the legislator retains the ultimate authority to draft and enact district maps. So maps enacted by the legislator may or may not be subject to gubernatorial veto. In this particular case, we will be able to share what happened after the maps were withdrawn. Advisory commissions may also be involved in redistricting process, although the legislator is not bound to adopt any of them. But this particular one is strictly legislator dominant. So the redistricting process here in the state of Georgia, by which new congressional and state legislative district boundaries are drawn, each of the Georgia's 14 United States representatives and 236 state legislators are elected from political divisions called districts. United States senators are not elected by districts, but by the states at large. Now, district lines are redrawn every 10 years following completion of the United States Census. And the census was extremely critical, especially for the Latino community, and every organization that is present on this panel worked really hard to make sure that our Latino community was engaged. So the census was key, not only because dollars were going to be coming into our communities, but also what it meant to redistricting. The federal government stipulates that districts must have nearly equal populations and must not discriminate on the basis of race and ethnicity. And here in Georgia, there's almost 1.1 million over that of us Latinos in the state of Georgia. That's a huge number. And of course, a lot of us who worked on the census, as I mentioned, all the organizations that are present, we know that that number is much higher with everything that went on during the census. You know, we question if that number is accurate, and we believe that number is much higher. So when it comes to redistricting, one of the things that was very clear was that following the 2020 United States Census, Georgia was a proportioned 14 congressional district, which was unchanged from the number it had from 10 years ago, from the 2010 census. Georgia's House of Representatives is made up of about 180, there's 180 districts. Georgia State Senate is made up of 56 districts. In Georgia, both congressional and state legislative district lines are drawn by the state legislature. And on December 30th of 2021, the governor, Governor Brian Kemp, signed Georgia's congressional map into law. He signed it into law. The Georgia General Assembly previously approved the map, with the state Senate voting 32-21 in favor of the map on November 19th, and followed by the state Senate, State House, voting 96-68 on November 22nd. So this map, effective for Georgia's 2022 congressional elections. In other words, this is where we are right now. Of course, there's going to be a lot of legal challenges that we see forthcoming. But Frankie wanted to go ahead and share real quickly that redistricting 101 and to be able to get a good little snapshot of what we're talking about. Of course, there's a lot more to it, and you will hear that in today's discussion.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. And now that Jackie have given us this explanation, I want to go to Gigi and to discuss how the Latino community in Georgia was engaged around redistricting, right? Now the Latino Community Fund joined other organizations to create the Latinx Redistricting Caucus. Part of that work was going into communities to explain the process of redistricting, but more importantly, why it matters. I was listening to you doing many other conversations that we have, and I believe you call it breaking the puzzle of how the rules were made. And I found that interesting. So can you talk to us about how you and other organizations work together to get involved in redistricting?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Frankie, the Hispanic Federation, of course, the Brennan Center, for the invitation. Buenos dias a todos. I was listening to Jackie, and, you know, it's so hard to grasp, even if you do this work and have been doing this work all the time, right? You have numbers, you have lines, you have people, you have statistics, you have there's been an undercount, now we know, right? 5% of Latinos, Latinx, Hispanics were undercounted in the census at least. So how do we make sense of all of this? Galeo, Jerry Gonzalez, and us at the Latino Community Fund, we actually co-hosted the Latinx caucus in Georgia that brought together over 17 organizations and dozens of advocates to ensure that, one, we understood the connection between census, elections, and redistricting. We had been able to be very successful in building census collaborative, a Latinx census collaborative. And so we wanted to make sure that the work was not done after the census, that the census and elections, these are all strategies, these are all opportunities. Redistricting is how rules are made. And so when everyone talks about and are actively working to build power, for us, it's important to the folks understand first how power works and how power looks like. And to us, with the redistricting caucus, we wanted to, first define what redistricting is and ensure that people are trained in understanding how it affects them, how they can engage, right? And train them to be effective and successful in the ways that they could engage, which were many, because we're still in a pandemic, and the legislature in Georgia did not make it easy. So again, dozens, actually, I have it in my notes, because if not, our team will not be happening. We were able to train over 55 advocates to learn how to provide testimony, for example, in any language they felt comfortable. We were able to go to various of the in-person hearings that the committee had and delivered testimony. 7 organizations actually participated. There was no language access in them, so we made sure that folks understood how it felt. And some of us testified in Spanish. Hundreds of us submitted comment because, again, we had been preparing for over 2 years for this. And when the time came to actively be involved and participate, which was around June in 2021, when we started, actively showing up and submitting testimony and comment and meeting with folks at the state level, but also at the county level, at the local level, it wasn't easy. There were just not a lot of avenues to participate. So one, for folks to recognize that this is by design, because we were ready. Mm-hmm. And when folks make it difficult for us to participate, make it visible that this is how power works. We had bi-weekly meetings. We have over 57 community events in which we trained over 49,000 people in understanding how redistricting works. And most importantly, we asked them to sign up and to uphold the values that we believe that a redistricting process needs to be transparent, and that we all wanted fair maps, meaning reflective of the communities that live, love, work, study in Georgia, and that we were part of, other communities. Even the discussion of what communities of interest meant was incredibly helpful and very illuminating, I think, for many of us, because you get to think for yourself, what are your interests? What is it that you want to see? What is it that you want to build? And then also how it is affecting you. And so I'll share a brief example for, with you all. We try to go as local as possible so that people see how it affects them. We believe that when people understand how it affects them, they realize that they can do something about it. They realize their own power, and then they use it. And so there is a strip in Metro Atlanta called Beaufort Highway that it's overwhelmingly immigrants, Black and Brown communities. It is also a district that has been gerrymandered in a way. It's a school district that has been gerrymandered in a way in which is 10 miles long and 3 miles wide. Basically, what you have around this very interesting highway, it's lots of apartment complexes with thousands of school children that just go to one district, right? It's a district that has not been invested in for decades. And I'm talking decades. And it's a district that happens to be broken down in 3 different the responsibility is 3 different board of education members. So nobody is ever responsible to fix it. And so once folks understand that redistricting has to do with also how districts are drawn, which also has to do with who gets an opportunity to be elected to represent the district, to make changes and decide that since 2019, the district has not been voting in for significant investment, which means that your kid has no bathroom to go to. Because we were together when you were crying because your child in middle school peed their pants because there were no bathroom stalls. Then you get that fire into you. So I just wanted to share that story because there are so many tools in the toolkit, and we wanted to make sure that we built and strengthen the why first, so that those that wanted to continue the work, and that I know Jerry will talk about, had all the information, all the power in them, all the energy to continue doing the work, and most importantly, amplify it. And yes, we all want fair maps, and we will continue to work for them. But there is a very important piece, which is that knowledge is power, and it's the first step to build power. So I feel that for us, that was a huge win. The fact that we got so many folks engaged, and if you look at our website, and I can tell you, we built a website, trilingual website, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. I can tell you that we had 51,000 visits from folks under 40 years old that wanted to know more about redistricting last year. And so to us, that's a huge win. And then, of course, 2021 passed. We're in 2021. 100% of organizations that joined this caucus agreed to continue working in local redistricting plans, in spite of all the challenges that Jerry will talk about. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gigi. I mean, when you break it down to bathroom stalls, it's just no brainer for people to understand the basic issues that sometimes we are dealing when it comes to issues like redistricting and representation. But also you mentioned something that is about, not affecting just our communities, about many communities being affected. And I'm going to go to Jerry now, because I know, Jerry, that, aside from working with the Latinx Redistricting Caucus, you also work together with multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions to create unity maps. Can you talk to us about these decision by Galeo to get involved with groups that represent other communities, and why it's so important to join forces to work on a unified map?
Thank you for that. Yes, it is one thing to keep in mind, and Gigi pointed out, again, it's a continuation of our what we were talking about with the census. It's about power and money. Power and money is what drives what census, why it's important for our community. But also, as part of that, Gigi talked about the resources that lack for us not getting enough bathroom stalls for children and not paying attention to children is because of the undercounts that happen, and children aren't represented in the census. And then we have the redistricting that happens to further dilute the community's power and the appropriate resources that our communities get. So from that perspective, talking about power, in Georgia, it's really important to look at power from a sense of how can we build power for our communities. Our communities live, work, and play in multiracial, multi-ethnic communities, and that's part of the vision and the strategy that we said. We know that the Black community was going to be growing significantly. We knew that the Latino community was going to be growing significantly. We knew that the Asian American community was going to be growing significantly. So we made a decision early on that for all of us to win, we needed to make sure that we did every effort to ensure that we looked at it from a multiracial, multi-ethnic perspective in order for us to create power for all of our communities. Black, Latino, and Asian communities values align. They vote similarly in Georgia, so those interests are aligned, and we needed to prove that as part of that process too. So we did get together with other organizations to make sure that we were able to present Georgia Unity Maps. And if you go to georgiaunitymaps.org, you'll be able to see actually the maps that we presented. Since 2004, the white population in Georgia in the electorate has steadily decreased, while the percentage of minority electorate has steadily increased, with the white share of the overall state population falling from 55.9% to 50.1% in the last census. As a result, people of color in Georgia now comprise almost half of the total population of the state. The proposed maps that we did provide the General Assembly did follow the redistricting principles with a particular interest in adhering to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but also it gave Georgia voters of color meaningful opportunity to elect candidates of choice. I mean, we could go down the list about what we were able to accomplish in the unity maps that we did draw. 8 out of the 14 congressional districts that we drew were majority people of color. 31 out of 56 state Senate districts were majority people of color. And state house districts, 96 of 180 state house districts were majority people of color. So the proof of the pudding is there. With the growth, even with the undercount in our communities, with the growth that was demonstrated in the census and the decrease in the white population, the Georgia legislature had an opportunity to make sure that the lines were drawn in a fair and accurate way to ensure that the communities of color were well represented. Instead, what they did was packed and cracked our communities. And what that is, and let's be very clear about that, what that is another form of voter suppression. You're not giving our communities the fair opportunity to be able to elect candidates of choice that they want to represent them in the legislature or in Congress. So that's why we're part of the coalition that presented GeorgiaUnityMaps.org, but we're also part of the coalition that has taken one of many lawsuits against the state on the redistricting process that's still pending. So we think the maps could have been drawn in a more fair and equitable way to ensure better representation for communities of color, but the Georgia legislature decided not to do that. They increased power for the white community and rural communities rather than respecting the growth where it was happening, which was in urban areas and in particular with communities of color.
Thank you, Jerry. I know that you have been talking about many different aspects of the impact of these maps that have been, somehow got through. But I want to give the opportunity to Jenny, who has been working to inform our community about the impact of redistricting and how the impact can occur in places we don't expect in different areas of our lives. So Jenny, can you expand a little bit more from what Jerry said? What are other ways in which our community will be impacted by these maps?
For sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Castillo, and I am with the Southern Economic Advancement Project, which is fiscally sponsored under the Roosevelt Institute. So I want to make sure that y'all know where to find us through the seed.org, but also to let you know of our great partnerships that we've had with groups like Fair Count and really having that conversation about what is redistricting, right? A lot of people still didn't really understand the impact of participating in the census, especially our Latinx community, because of fear, because of unknowing things, but the impact that the lines have really changed the way our businesses are looked at, right? If we are a business owner, and everybody here is a business owner, y'all, if you have an idea and you can sell that idea, then you are a business owner, whether that is a nonprofit or a for-profit organization. You want to make sure that you are providing services to a community. And the way to understand that is because of the power of the census. And these maps really detail where our people are. And because they have so much dynamic conversations about, oh, we're going to put these particular people in this one area, that also changes where their districts are. Like the great panelists before me have been talking about, it's not just a narrative of who we're going to vote for, it's who we're going to serve. And when we're talking about access to healthcare, when we're talking to access to businesses, when we're talking to access to education, all of these lines matter, because in one moment of a particular neighborhood being zoned to go to a school that's 25 miles away versus a school that's 10 miles away, because they're no longer in the district, it tends to impact most of our Black and brown communities. And when we're talking about where we're going to put our businesses, we're looking at organizations that are thinking about where is the population, right? We are Latinos, but we also are not a monolith, right? Like, I am Dominican. We like very spiceful foods, not spicy foods, right? So where am I going to put my Dominican restaurant in a community that really enjoys spicy food, y'all? It's not going to work. It's not going to bring as much impact to my end of the day receipts, because I'm not going to be able to serve the community as I want to. So when we're thinking about how this doesn't impact me, this doesn't matter for me, it does. It matters for the future of the community, and matters of the future of how we're going to be able to actually talk to this community. At SEEP, we spend a lot of time doing surveys and trying to find out what are the needs of these particular communities. And census, redistricting, all of this goes hand in hand. If there is not a clear distinction of where our people are, we cannot provide them services. And so I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation with such an incredible panel, to really understand that when we do participate in the census and we participate in redistricting, we're participating in a future that's going to look different, not only today, but 10 years from now. Because next thing you know, wherever we can put our businesses will change, because our people have changed. And on top of all of that, we always talk about being in Atlanta and we talk about being full, right? Don't come here, we're full. Turns out, y'all, a lot of people left. A lot of people have left Fulton County, DeKalb County, Clayton County. That's where our people are. So we need to know where they are so we can actually participate greatly in how we're going to serve them.
Well, Jenny, very important information, but the promise is that next time we do this, we do it in person with Dominican food, serve as part of the panel. You guys have been doing extraordinary work, and I am super proud of having you all part of this conversation, because you have done so much. And another partner is the Brennan Center, who has also been at the forefront of informing the public about the impact of redistricting and the importance of getting involved and paying attention to the maps that have been drawn. Yuri, you have actually authored a redistricting state of profile of Georgia. And in the end, you mentioned that I'm quoting, Georgia's population has undergone a profound evolution over the course of the last decade. But do you think that these maps are taking into account this profound evolution? Have the state really thinking about the growth and diversity?
Well, the short answer is no. But I want to back up to really put more of the kind of background and pull some of the things together. And it's really an honor to be here to talk about this issue. This is something that I do all day, every day at the Brennan Center. Redistricting is my entire focus of my work. And the things that Jackie and Gigi and Jerry and Jenny have discussed is really at the heart of it. The way that I try to think about this is there are three components to fair redistricting, and it starts with the census. It starts with accurate data. Without accurate data, you're not going to have fair redistricting. So that's where everything begins, and that's the first ingredient that goes in. The second, and you've heard about this, is the process. There needs to be a fair and inclusive process where all communities are able to share their specific needs. And that means both being represented in the people who are drawing the districts and having an opportunity for community members to actually interact with those who are going to be drawing the maps. And the third thing, and this is where it all comes together, is the outcomes have to be fair. And the thing to remember about fair outcomes is that to remember why redistricting happens in the first place. And I apologized for getting a little bit philosophical here, but the purpose of redistricting, the reason why it exists and why it is such a core part of our democracy is that our system of government is supposed to reflect the people that live in the country, in each state, in each county, in each city. That is the central idea. And of course, it's been a fight over the history of this country to actually make sure that these ideas come into effect. And racial discrimination and racism has, since the beginning, been one of the major challenges. And so redistricting is, at its heart, concerned with taking a look at the population, seeing how it's changed and seeing how it's changing, and drawing districts in ways that reflect that, to make sure that representatives look like the people that they serve, that they think like the people that they serve, and that they bring the issues that are important to these various communities so people have solutions, so they can build their businesses, so they can raise their kids, so they can have that American dream, that opportunity to do better. And so redistricting is so central to all of that. And since it does center on understanding the population and understanding communities, which you've already heard from my co-panelists, and so you have to look at that. That's where you have to start, and that's what we did in our study. And when you look at Georgia, the state has grown tremendously, and it has changed tremendously. And as Jerry already highlighted, and I really want to emphasize this, the state added more than 1 million people. The white population actually decreased. So more than 100% of the growth of the state is on account of growth from Latino communities and other communities of color, Black communities, Asian communities, et cetera. And so when you think about the outcome from redistricting, that's what you have to look at. Do the new districts reflect the fact that the white population has decreased while these populations of color have increased? And unfortunately, because, well, to begin, the census, as you've heard, has an undercount. So not all people were fully counted, and there is a racial component to that, and we know that. The second thing is the process, and we know, again, that the process did not happen in an inclusive way that looked to communities to inform where district lines should be drawn. And the third thing is the outcomes. And when you look at the districts that this legislature produced, there are virtually no additional opportunities for Latino communities, for other communities of color. And this is something that we're taking a closer look at. We're going to follow up on the study that we released before redistricting happened to see, now that redistricting has happened, what does this all mean? But you don't have to look to a study. There's actually been already a successful lawsuit in federal court where on behalf of Black voters that sued under the Voting Rights Act, challenging the maps, looking at whether all communities have been given an equal opportunity to participate in elections, to elect candidates that really reflect the values of their communities and that represent their communities. And a federal court said no. A federal court said that the districts are discriminatory. That the white communities have more political power than other communities, that the system, that the districts that were drawn are unfair. And this is true in Metro Atlanta and in places like Gwinnett County, outside of the city, where there are significant Latino populations, there are significant Asian populations, there are significant Black populations. And this county, like Gwinnett, really is the future of this country. And it's a very profound thing. It used to be an all-white county, or virtually all-white county. It was the place where white folks leaving Atlanta after the civil rights movement would move. And now it's becoming a multi-ethnic community with lots of immigrants and lots of different people of different backgrounds living together. And I don't want to paint it too rosy of a picture. I think there are challenges that come with these sorts of changes, but there is also a real opportunity to realize what this country should be about. And instead, the districts that were drawn in places like Gwinnett were done to deliberately reduce the influence of these growing communities, of these changing counties and locations and regions within the city. But it's not just Metro Atlanta, it's also rural places. And so it's really an unfortunate thing because it disconnects government and it disconnects democracy from the people. And the issue isn't just whether it's drawn fairly for 2022. As Jenny mentioned, these are districts that should be in place for a decade. And the thing is the population will continue to change. And these trends that we saw from 2010 to 2020, they're going to continue. And fair districts aren't just ones that provide for good representation in the upcoming election, but they're ones that will be accurate over the course of the decade in 2024, 2026, 2028, and 2030. So these discriminatory impacts, these poorly drawn districts, will only get worse as the decade continues.
Julie, you mentioned several elements that are going to be highly impacted, but some people that may be watching right now, they say like, well, this ship sailed. The census was not great. In fact, it was like, we know that there's an undercount, the maps are drawn. So is there something, and this question is for any one of you who wants to jump in, what do we do at the short term? Do we have to start planning? Are we too early to start planning what is going to happen in 8 years? What is your take of like what people can do right now? And this is open to anybody. And we have a symphony of names here: Jury, Jenny, Jerry, Gigi, Jackie, talking about Georgia. So this is kind of like a symphony. I'm the only one that is like not in sync with the names. So anybody.
Well, I think when we're talking about, can you start too early? Absolutely not. I mean, we're talking about folks like Gigi and Jerry who have been in the trenches for over a decade. Okay, they've been in the trenches. And one of the things that Naleo Education has done is to make sure that we support organizations like them. And the way that I, want to use this opportunity to thank them from the bottom of my heart is because with so many challenges that they have come upon, Gigi and Jerry, they're right there. They don't let go. And, and that is so important because this could become very discouraging. As a former elected official, I can tell you that when you see injustice, and especially because it's based on our skin color, I remind everyone that this is our country. We might, as an immigrant, I came from Ecuador, didn't speak a word of English, and a lot of us on our panel, Colombian, Dominicanos, Puerto Ricanos, Mexicanos, right? This panel is a beautiful reflection of who we are. And what I remind folks is this is our country. The United States of America is our country. And what we're doing is making sure that our community is very engaged, is very civic minded, and that the only way that there's going to be changes is that if we're at the table. So folks like Galeo, who make sure that there's these leaderships academies, folks like Gigi, who are in the trenches and making sure that there's community leader symposiums left and right, and just continuing to bring our community together, These things are crucial, and you can never start too early. We're already getting ready for 2030. We're already getting ready, all of us, because we know that we can't put, our guard down. So I just want to thank everyone who doesn't give up, and that, that we start early. Despertamos bien tempranito, los cafecitos, and then all day long, because it could be taken away from us in the blink of an eye. And we have seen that. We have seen that happen in the last 6 years. It has been a little bit overwhelming, pero at times a little bit emotional, pero nos limpiamos las lágrimas and we get back up, and we're going to fight for our people, and even those that don't have a voice.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important that we start early. Thank you, Frankie, for the question.
Thank you, Jackie. Gigi, what do we
Yes.
need to do?
Yes, I wanted to say that, we have been always, working towards this, and particularly we started working in redistricting for last year in 2018, when we launched the census group, because we knew that this was the beginning of the redistricting work. So we've already been working on this. We never stopped working on this, and we will not stop working on this because it is not done. There's all kinds of also legal tools that we can use. And there are elections every year, everywhere. And so the work never stops. It actually builds on each other. And so I wanted to give an example because with all due respect, mi compadre Jerry, acá se merece, the first time I canvassed was in 2010 for Galeo. Right? Galeo was already doing this work, and Jerry didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. and I knocked on a few doors, and I got engaged in the work, and I started learning more, and this is where I am. And so I think our work is not to stop working, but also built on the younger folks. And this is why the statistics about, the direct link to our social media page on redistricting was mostly folks under 40 from their Instagram accounts, is what keeps me motivated and inspired to continue to doing the work, because these are the folks that are living in their own bodies and minds what it is, how does it feel to not be able to be represented, to know that it is extremely hard to get elected. There is a reason why, Georgia is one of the states with the highest percentages of incumbents. It's by design. I think I saw statistics that in 2019, 80% of all the elected officials, all the seats in Georgia were incumbents. And so that is, the maps are happening, the maps that we are seeing approved are happening because people are afraid of us. That's why. Because we're growing, because we're voting, because we're participating. So I don't want to lose that side, that little fire, right? That motivation, that we are winning. And sometimes wins look a little bit different for all of us, but we are making progress. Democracy is in crisis, and we need to work against that. So.
I just want to add that, the ship hasn't sailed, the ship is still sailing. And our democracy, we're building power for our community, and that scares people. And we're building power across race and ethnicity, and that scares people. So it's just the census, the redistricting maps that are in place now are not done. We are in litigation to make sure that we can get a fairer shot of making sure that there's better representation. Just because they drew the districts doesn't mean they stay the way they drew them, in the sense that, for example, Representative Pedro Marin was in the last redistricting cycle was drawn into a heavily Republican district, and yet he prevailed. Why? Because as Yuri mentioned, these maps will continue to change, the demographics will continue to change, and that's why it's important for our communities to continue to be involved in the democracy that we want, because together we're building power for our community, and that's what it's all about. So the ship hasn't sailed, there's still time to participate, and that's why we ask people to join us and make sure that they can join our work and Gigi's work and everybody's work here to make sure that we can make a democracy that better reflects us all.
And by you said, go ahead, Jenny.
I would just want to tell folks, especially the joven or lo que se ven joven, because some of us may not be that age that we look, but if you want to get involved, actually get involved, right? I think a lot of folks have this conception of, well, I voted. Okay, pues you got to do more. Like if you're trying to lose weight, you can't just eat the salad and think that it's going to work. You have to go to the gym, you have to work out, you have to eat right. And that's what civic participation looks like. It's actually voting and then getting 5 friends to come out and vote, and then going canvassing, and then coming to the community meetings, and then running for office, and then getting other people to run for office, because a lot of people need to retire, because a lot of times they think that they're the only voice that needs to be at the table. And we need to make a practice of really trying to get our people to come into the fold. And that can look as easy as sharing something on social media. That can be as easy as coming to an event, or really just sharing your voice and explaining it, because a lot of people just don't know. They don't understand what these words mean, not because they're not educated, it's just because they're not involved. So we really need to get it easier for folks to share their information, volunteer for us, make sure that we're bringing them part of the conversations, so that we have more people that do look and think like us, inspiring others to think for themselves and really fight for the larger vision here.
I like that, Jenny, that civic engagement should not be a trend or a hobby. It should be a lifestyle, right? We should be embracing many of these aspects of civic engagement. It's just like, oh, I voted one time and I did my duties, about embracing many of this. I know that we're running out of time, but Jerry, you alluded that these maps may change, and there is litigation right now about these maps, and they can be thrown out. What will happen if these maps are thrown out, and what is the impact on the next election cycle? Anybody?
So I'll start, and certainly others can chime in. What I can say about it is part of the process is to ensure that we can make the proposals for fairer maps in the federal court. Unfortunately, the federal courts in this particular district are not necessarily very friendly to voting rights, and that's part of the challenge that we have. We have a Supreme Court that isn't very friendly to voting rights with regards to that. So we're hopeful, and we're going to continue to make the case that these maps do discriminate against minority communities, because they do. And make sure that we can make the case, even if we have to, all the way to the Supreme Court, to ensure that the maps in Georgia better reflect the growth that we've seen in the community. But it is a process. It doesn't end there, and we're hopeful that we're going to be successful there.
Anybody else wants to join in on this? Otherwise, I'm going to go to another question that was sent to us via chat. What are some of the resources that we can access to learn more about redistricting, especially in Spanish?
I'll go ahead. We have a page called latinosfordemocracy.net, Latinos por la Democracia. And our campaign, it's called Un Mapa para Todos, a map for all. And it's a campaign that continue, right? Our work that we started again with Galeo on census under the tagline, Yo cuento en Georgia, estamos aquí. Once we count and once we affirm that we exist and are here and visible, then we need a map that represents us all. So Un Mapa para Todos, it's our campaign, it's our latinosfordemocracy.net page. I'm happy to put it on the chat for you all.
Excellent, excellent. So we're running out of time, and I want to give the opportunity to each one of you to give us some of your final thoughts about redistricting. What is the future of Georgia, and what is your aspiration? What would you like to see in this process now and in the long term, and maybe what is going to happen in 2030? So let's start with Jenny with a G.
So if you all want to get involved with the work that I do, please visit at theseap.org, SEAP, and get involved, y'all, in cualquier cosa, like for real. Go to the websites that Gigi has provided. Go to my website, check out Jerry's and Jackie and Yuri's. Like, really get involved and explain it. The best way that I'm gonna say it like this. I like analogies. Y'all all know you use Vicks Vapor Rub, but let's be very clear. And we've never even seen a commercial for it, okay? We all use it because it's word of mouth. We all rely on the history of Vicks Vapor Rub for our people. That's what we need to start doing with all these other things. Start talking to your friends, because when you talk to your friends and family, they trust you. They will really find some kind of understanding if you break it down to them. I have been able to get so many people to vote simply for just existing and being a part of the dialogue. Why should I vote? What am I voting for? Why is this important? And breaking it down so they can see how everything's interconnected. I hope that you all stay involved. 2030 is not that far away, y'all. According to the math, it's 8 years from now, and that goes by in a blink of an eye. So be involved, stay connected, and really focus on trying to build each other up. And this idea, instead of trying to do it by yourself, collaborate with other groups. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation. And I thank you all for the time and the invitation.
Thank you, Jenny. Jury, I'm going to go next to you. Probably I will have to sit down separately to explain the Vicks Vapor Rub connection to our community. But, you know, I promise that will be on the next conversation. But what do you want our audience to take away from this conversation from the perspective of the Brennan Center?
Well, I think engagement is absolutely key. And to that end, here at the Brennan Center, we recognize the critical role that Latino communities will be playing in shaping our democracy going forward. That's why we're launching Brennan in Espanol later this month, which is going to have a tremendous number of resources about redistricting, about voting, about election disinformation, about all the issues that are facing our democracy. So that's one thing, is just getting engaged, understanding these issues, and really understanding how they impact your local community. But then bigger picture wise, and this is this is my lawyer brain speaking, I think there are two approaches, and it comes from the top and from the bottom. We need more tools, we need more safeguards, we need federal reform. As Jerry mentioned, federal courts have stopped giving full effect to the protections that exist, that ensure that communities of color have a fair opportunity to participate in our democratic systems. But the other thing is, I believe that our multiracial democracy will be built from the ground up. That means school boards, that means counties, that means city councils. These are the pathways to these higher offices. And I think fighting at that local level, organizing, and really making a case, making sure that the needs and that the voices of these communities cannot be silenced, because I agree with Gigi completely. These tools are a sign of weakness. It is a sign of fear. And I think the most important thing is to not be discouraged, and instead draw strength from the lengths to which people will go to try to minimize the influence of Latino communities in Georgia.
And if I may add, you know, we're living in a moment in which we have been going through so much, and our community has faced such a steep price due to the pandemic. If we are going to be aspiring for a fair and equitable recovery, we need to elevate all communities of colors together, not one versus the other, not pitting each other against each other. We need to work together and make sure that the resources are there for all communities, and not just because otherwise we will be in pre-pandemic times, and we were not okay pre-pandemic. Jackie, final words before we close.
Yes, I'm just really excited. Nosotros somos guerreros, right? Just by nature, everything that we've done, being so brave. Our community is extremely involved once we educate what's going on. I know that for a fact. Even just 10 years ago, I was with Naleo Educational Fund, even 10 years ago, and a lot of the folks that we were able to get together throughout the country, 10 years later, are elected officials. So our community, you get them engaged, you get them knowledgeable of what's going on, they will be engaged. There's over 7,000 Latinos elected officials in this country. Over 7,000. Those numbers by 2030 are going to be even more. So like I said before, this is our country. Our community just needs to know that they must be civic minded because it affects us in every level. And seguimos adelante.
Yeah.
Seguimos adelante.
Claro que sí, Jackie. Jerry, I don't want to call you out here as the one that has been working for a long time in Georgia to try to get us to a fair and better place. But, you know, in your experience, you know, working in this field for so long, what are the message that you want us to take away from this conversation?
I just want to say, I mean, teamwork makes the dream work for our community, and it requires all of us to do our part. We're talking about power, building power for our communities. Let's center it on that, and that scares people because we want to make sure our community is respected and valued for the significant contributions it makes to the state and to this country. And power is never given; it must be taken. And we have the ability to be able to take the power that exists for our community and make sure that we can demand the respect that we deserve. So we need to make sure that we engage and we invite everybody to engage in ways that they're able to engage to make sure that that power is really taken to make sure that our community gets the respect it deserves.
Yeah. And Gigi.
I want to encourage everyone to keep their elected officials and appointed officials accountable, regardless of who wins. They work for us. We are their bosses. We can fire them or hire them every time there is an election. Even in places where you may think that, oh, this person looks like me, be vigilant, because every day they are passing ordinances, policies, presenting bills, and especially if the lines are not represented, the maps are not, the districts are not representative of the people, they need to hear from us because they likely don't know. So our job, and it's unfair, right? But our job is to educate them, keep them accountable, and tell them we will fire them if they don't act the way we need them to do because they work for us.
Thank you, Gigi, Jury, Jenny, Jerry, and Jackie. Talking about redistricting in Georgia, I want to thank everybody who's listening. And I want to thank our incredible working groups, not only these amazing organizations here, but everybody that have been working so hard to make sure that we continue to move forward. As Jerry said, we need to take power. We need to make sure that we do that. Thank you to the Brennan Center and Brennan en Español for working in partnership with us and helping us organize these important panels. I really wanted to focus on the impact to all Latinos, but I believe that we also have to talk about all communities of color and how we work together and the intersectionality between within our community and also with other communities. So you can see a recording of this panel and other panels at Hispanic Federation's YouTube and Facebook pages and the Brennan Center's Facebook page. This video today will be also uploaded to our Redistricting Academy, where you can access content about redistricting in Spanish and in English at redistrictingacademy.org. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Muchísimas gracias. Que tengan un buen día.